Christine Jacobs. I'm the Executive Director of Represent PA. Represent supports powering progressive women in Harrisburg. We're a large PAC that provides funding for women running for the state legislature, both the House and the Senate. Our goal is to flip the legislature, both houses, with strong progressive women and a few good men. And last cycle, we invested $500,000 in races. This cycle, we want to do at least that. And we want to do it with fabulous candidates who are going to be supported by the people you're going to hear from today. Trevor Southerland has just recently been named as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania House Democratic Caucus Committee. Trevor used to have a similar role in Virginia, and where Democrats took control of the Virginia House of Delegates for the first time in 20 years. And by the way, it was named a woman speaker and a woman majority leader in Virginia. And he's worked on campaigns throughout the country, and Pennsylvania is his next big challenge. And we all know that we're a purple state and who went for Biden but didn't manage to flip our legislature, and that's our goal in 2022. Next slide. And then we also today have the amazing Leanne Krueger on the call. Leanne is the first woman to chair the HDCC, and she's vice chair of the Southeast delegation. Leanne has another distinction and another, we all have a soft spot for Leanne for another reason. We supported her the first time she ran for the legislature, and she did not win. And the person who won resigned, in his first term, and Leanne won the special election. So we like to tell people Leanne is the first woman that we endorsed who flipped a seat, and we've been proud to support her ever since. What we're going to do today, and I have very few slides because I really want to focus on our two guest speakers today. Leanne is going to open and talk about what's going on in Harrisburg. I keep telling people that we are just like Texas in terms of the quality of the legislation being brought up by the Republican leadership, both in the House and in the Senate. Look at the things that Texas has done in terms of women and abortion. Look at what they've done on election rights and voting rights. Look what they've done on so many other issues. Harrisburg is right there with them. But two things. First of all, I'm not sure the Republican leadership is as good at putting forth legislation that gets passed. And the second thing is that most of the things that they'll come up with will be vetoed. I read a piece this morning that said that Tom Wolf has vetoed over 50 pieces of legislation in his years in office. A third of those have been in the last term because so much junk is being passed by our Republican legislature. But Leanne will talk about that. We'll also talk a bit about, we're all disappointed. Biden took Pennsylvania, thank goodness. But why didn't the Dems take the legislature? Why was there so much ballots splitting? And also, I mentioned we're working hard to raise money for these 2022 races. We want to have at least as much money as we did last cycle, but will we see different results? Is money going to be the difference, or what else is happening? And the people who are in charge of figuring out what else is happening are on the call today. So Leanne, what is going on in Harrisburg?
First of all, it's great to see so many familiar faces, and I see some fearless women as well who ran for office in 2020. Thank you so much for running. And I know some of you are running again, and I'm hoping that Represent will be supporting you as well. So Chris asked me to talk just a little bit about what we're up against in Harrisburg right now. So you may have heard that last week in the Health Committee, 3 unconstitutional, for now, abortion bans came out of committee: House Bill 1118, House Bill 904, and House Bill 1500. We have fought these same bills previously, but they're getting more attention this time, I think partially because the US Supreme Court is taking up a challenge to Roe v. Wade. There is a decision expected potentially next June of 2022, and most of the folks I talk to on the national level expect them to weaken, if not overturn Roe, which will be devastating for so many folks across the country. But the Harrisburg Republican Republicans are playing the same game here. So House Bill 1118, you may have heard about this because some social media from Valor Kush has gone viral. This bill would make it mandatory for a woman to get a death certificate if she has a miscarriage or abortion, and also mandate a burial or cremation of those fetal remains. Now, seeing the number of women on this call, I imagine that there's folks in the room who, like me, have had miscarriages and understand that the man who wrote this bill understands nothing about the biology of how a miscarriage even happens. And so this bill is expected to come up for second consideration on Monday, final passage Tuesday next week. We're gearing up for a fight against it, but it is an incredibly traumatizing bill that is meant, I believe, to shame women. House Bill 904 is a 6-week abortion ban. So before many women even know they're pregnant, there would be a ban on abortion. And then House Bill 1500, again, we fought this in the past. It would make it a felony for a doctor to perform an abortion if there's a diagnosis of Down syndrome. So all three of these bills we fought, we're gearing up again. We think House Bill 1118 and potentially also House Bill 1500 will be on the floor next week for final passage. Here's the bright light though, folks. Since I was elected with Represent Support back in 2015, we've elected 24 additional women to the PA House. That doesn't even include the women that you've helped elect to the Senate. I am confident now that we can protect the governor's veto on these bills. And when I first got to Harrisburg, that actually wasn't the case. In fact, half of our House Democratic leadership team would have been voting for these bills. But a lot of those folks have retired. We have an amazing leadership team led by Joanna McClinton that's ready to fight back. And even though I expect these bills to pass the House when they run, we'll be able to protect the veto. And then the other one I want to flag for you is House Bill 637. I know environmental issues are issues that folks from Represent have tracked, and many of you are passionate about. The governor has signed Pennsylvania on to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is the biggest climate action we've seen in decades. And the Republicans have tried every single step of the way to block it. And so I've got a committee voting meeting next week on House Bill 637, which is one more attempt to prevent the governor from actually entering into this climate agreement. And those are just the bills that I know about right now. We're in Harrisburg for all of June because the budget is due, according to the state constitution, by June 30th. There are also voter suppression bills pending after hosting a dozen taxpayer-funded hearings on election security and giving a platform for Republican legislators to spew all of the rhetoric that goes along with the big lie. The House Republicans released a 99-page report, and there's definitely voter suppression bills coming. We're just not sure which ones they're going to run yet and when. So whether you care about voting rights or choice or clean air and clean water, all of those things will be under attack in our state capitol this month. And that's why your work with Represent is more important than ever, because I have seen fundamentally the only way that we shift things is to change who's in control and who has the gavel, because the majority chairmen who run these committees have complete control over what bills they do and don't run. The bills that you like are not coming anytime soon, and the bills that horrify us are running in pretty quick fashion. So that's an update from Harrisburg. Next slide, Trevor. So I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of what we've learned from 2020, and then I'm going to turn this over for Trevor to talk about our plans moving forward. So some of you may have been part of debrief conversations already with Term PA Blue or Change PA or some of the other many groups who worked to help Democrats last year. We finally got the precinct level data in April. And so any conclusions that were drawn before that were somewhat speculative, but to really crunch the numbers, we needed the precinct level data of who voted how to really start to draw some conclusions. And Pennsylvania was actually the last state in the country to release that data. We expected to have it in February, and it wasn't until our leader, Joanna McClinton, made multiple calls to the governor that we finally got it. And so that's what we've been, sort of sitting with and making sense of. And here's what I can tell you. Apart from Georgia, which didn't do great down ballot until the special election at the beginning of this year, 2020 was bad for Democrats everywhere. None of the targeted chambers flipped. We're still at a point where the last chamber to flip from red to blue was Virginia House, which Trevor helped lead back in 2019. And many chambers actually lost more incumbent members than we did. In fact, in New Hampshire, the Democrats lost control. They lost the speakership. They had a new Republican Speaker of the House. He contracted COVID on swearing in day and then actually died of COVID a few weeks later. So the devastation that we felt here down ballot, we've seen everywhere. Now, one of the things we saw when we dug into the numbers is that 14 of our candidates had actually hit or exceeded the number of votes that we had projected they needed to win. And I want to say that again. So when we did our modeling for the election, which is similar modeling to what the pollsters did, and looking at who's likely to turn out and how many votes do we think we need, 14 of our folks actually exceeded that number. But there was a Trump surge at the end, and the exit polling that was done here in Pennsylvania showed that these are folks who were what we call very low propensity voters. So maybe they hadn't voted in 20 years. Maybe they had just registered to vote. No one was expecting them to come out on either side, actually. And many of these folks were late deciding voters who didn't even decide if they were going to vote until about 10 days before the election. And not only did they come in to vote for Trump, but they also steadily voted down ballot for the rest of the Republicans. Now, remember, this is the first election where we didn't have straight ticket voting, and Republicans reliably vote on their side down much more than Democrats do, especially in a presidential election. There were plenty of folks who went in who cast a protest vote for Biden over Trump and didn't actually vote for anybody else down ballot. And so in some of these races, I see Deb Siamaka on the call. Deb had the second closest race in the state. We had more than 10% higher turnout than anyone had expected in her race. And so while Deb did a great job of contacting folks and getting to the number we thought she needed, in the end, that late deciding Trump surge was insurmountable. And we also saw that there were a lot of folks, what Trump was doing was so horrifying that there were moderates or even Republicans who decided they couldn't vote for him, but then they switched and voted Republican rest of the way down the ballot. And then this is a really important factor as well. So at the leaders, sort of at the direction of the Biden campaign, we pulled people off of door knocking during COVID because of safety reasons. And I can't say that that is a decision that I regret, because as far as I know, none of our volunteers or candidates died of COVID last year. But we lost a very, very important feedback loop because, we had polls that were saying one thing. And traditionally, when you're knocking on doors as a candidate or as a super volunteer for a candidate, you're sort of getting this really important feedback. When you're looking somebody in the eye, you can sort of feel in your gut whether your message is resonating. You can get a sense of where the various races feel. And then you can take that back and input that data. And it's sort of like a gut check on what the polling is telling you. We didn't have that in 2020. And even when folks started to knock doors at the end, we didn't have the volunteer base. Even in places where we tried to do paid canvassing, we couldn't find people who were willing to knock doors during COVID, even with safety provisions. And so the volunteer folks who were supporting our candidates switched to phone banking and switched to texting. But at the end of the day, we realized that the quality of those conversations and the quality of the data just couldn't match what you get in a face-to-face conversation at the doors. There was also something that the pollsters have called non-response bias, which meant during COVID, during the pandemic, most Democrats believed in science. They were staying home, they were staying safe, and they were picking up the phones and they were talking to volunteers and they were talking to pollsters. And in the end, there were another block of folks who didn't trust polling, who maybe weren't following the science, who weren't picking up the phones as much. And in the end, those are the folks who went into the Trump column. And so it was absolutely a perfect storm. Those low propensity Trump voters, we are hopeful that they won't come out again without Trump on the ballot. He was the he was the driver for them, but we won't know that for sure until we get to look at turnout numbers from this year and we look at numbers for next year. So that's where we're at. I don't believe there's anything that our candidates could have done differently to overcome this, because at the end of the day, those Trump surge voters, they were not persuadable. They were not folks where a face-to-face conversation with a candidate could have changed their minds. When we analyze the messaging, especially here in Pennsylvania, the Biden campaign messaging was rational, and the Trump messaging was all about culture wars. Democrats will defund the police. Democrats are socialists. Your communities will be unsafe. And so the Trump messaging was very much all Democrats are bad, not just Biden. And that messaging was so significant here in Pennsylvania that even though we had record spending for paid communications, you can't really compete with an onslaught from the top down that was just so darn negative. So that's what we know from 2020 right now. Now, we have these numbers, for the candidates on the call. If Trevor hasn't reached out to you yet to do a debrief with you on the numbers, I see Claudia is here. I also see Jill Denon, all of whom ran great campaigns. Trevor and our staff are willing to walk you through the numbers at a deeper level because we have quite a bit of data, including what the drop-off was in each of these districts. So at the end of the cycle, our executive director, Dina Gleason, who I know some of you met, was hired away by the national folks of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. She now has Pennsylvania in her portfolio, and we're counting on her to bring as much national money into Pennsylvania as possible. We are already a top targeted chamber again for the DLCC. And so we did a national search. And as Chris said, we hired the guy who flipped the last chamber to flip in the country, Trevor Southerland, who has been on the ground for about a month now. And Trevor, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thank you, Representative. I appreciate it, and good to see everybody on the call today. Glad to have so many of you here. First, I want to just tell you a little about myself. So this is my wonderful family. My wife, Whitney, she's half cut out there, but that's how she, took the picture. So, okay, it's her. And my son, Samuel, there, he's just turned 4 years old. And this is what my life is. My life is my wife, my son, and winning elections. And that is the front page of the Richmond Times-Dispatch the day after we took the assembly. We won both the House and the Senate. I like down there at the bottom, if you look, you'll see the appropriations chairman among GOP casualties. It was so sad to see him go. He's now the former appropriations chairman. We'll see if we can't keep that going a little bit. I want to talk to you a little bit as we look forward to 2022, what we are looking at the committee, what we're working on, and what we're going to be building towards and what we need your help with. First off, new maps. We're going to have new maps to run on. We don't know exactly how that is going to come out, but we do know that we'll have new maps for next year. And that's obviously going to influence a lot of what we do. That is also going to influence candidate recruitment quite a bit. Once those new maps come out, hopefully sometime early next year, we're going to have a couple of months, and it's sort of going to be a rush to make sure that we have good candidates running in those districts that we have the ability to flip. But right now, we can be and we are doing candidate recruitment in other regions. There are areas where we know the lines are sort of going to stay the same or shift a little bit, but the bigger districts, it's easier. And we're already doing candidate recruitment in those areas because one of the keys to winning at the state legislative level is running as many candidates as you possibly can. Even in districts that pundits call unwinnable or red or whatever they want to call them, we need to run candidates everywhere we can in Pennsylvania, because even if it's a district that we can't win at the state house level, we can do positive things in that district. We can build our local organizations and parties. We can train candidates that might then run for local office or build to different races in the future. There's a lot that you can do when you run for office besides winning. And we want to win, that's our goal. But in some of these districts, unfortunately, it's a much steeper climb. But we're still working there because we need to have candidates in every district. We're going to do candidate and staff training next year. This is going to be probably a 3 or 4 day retreat, one for staff, one for candidates. We're going to do a lot of in-depth training. We're really going to get into the mechanics of what you need to do to run a state house level campaign. There are a bunch of organizations that do wonderful trainings. Don't get me wrong, I love them. We are going to target 100% state house because that is what we care about at the HDCC. We're also looking at the numbers quite closely throughout Pennsylvania to see a couple of things. You look at DPI, Democratic Performance Index. I know a lot of you know this, but for those of you that don't, the way you calculate that is you put several elections together and you come up with what should be what a generic Democratic candidate would get in that election. The problem with DPI sometimes is that districts change quickly. I was looking at a district the other day that when it was drawn in 2010, it was a 56% DPI seat. Today, it's a 31% DPI seat. It has changed drastically. DPI does not always keep up with population changes as quickly, so we have to look at other things. We have to look at what Biden got. We have to look at what Shapiro got. We have to look at what our 2020 Dem candidate got, because we want to be able to compare. Did Shapiro outpoll Biden in these districts? How did Dem do? Where did all that line up? Because that will help you see in each district what may be a little bit different. Sometimes it's a candidate issue, sometimes it's a district issue, sometimes it's a issue of policy. So we just have to look into that. I am very excited to tell you that we are getting back on the doors at the HDCC. Our members are going to be going out and knocking. We are also going to be looking at starting a deep canvassing program this summer and fall. I am very excited about that. This is something that we're working on finding some funding for, because we do need help to make sure it happens. For those of you, again, I know most of you know this, so I'm not trying to say it to you, but to anybody who doesn't know, deep canvassing is a longer form of canvassing. Normally, when you go out and canvass, you knock on the door, you say, hi, you know, I'm a volunteer with so can I count you to vote for Joe Biden? Can I count you to vote for Leanne Krueger? Have you made a plan? You do that type of canvassing. It's very questions, yes, no, right answers. So when you do deep canvassing, you more want them to talk. It's more conversational. It's more things like, what do you want your state representative to be doing? What do you not want your state representative to be doing? How are things? You want to get feedback from people. It takes longer. And so during the campaign season, it's not the most effective thing because you need to talk to a lot of people. But coming off of 2020, deep canvassing is going to be very important for us to get into some of these regions and get feedback from people. It's almost like doing one-person focus groups. You just want to listen to the person, get feedback, and feed that back to our data loop. Because the big thing with our polling is our modeling and data. So I'm going to do my pet peeve real quick, and I apologize for this. But every election, somebody goes and they say, polling is broken. The polling was wrong. I'm going to be honest with you. Most of the time, the polling isn't wrong. The modeling is wrong. The model is who you're polling. So in 2020, most of the polls across Pennsylvania and other places in the country were not reaching these Trump voters who were just Trump voters. And so because of that, the polling data was not accurate because of the modeling. And so that's something that we're going to work on. We're going to spend a lot of time making sure we get it right in 22, because if we're not putting good data in, we're not going to get good data out. I also want to talk for a second about messaging, because this is something very important, especially for Democrats. And I say this especially for Democrats because we are the type of people that will take 90 minutes to tell you our names. As a Democrat, we want to explain. We want to help you understand, and that takes a long time. Republicans say things like, lock her up. It's easy. It's simple. You can chant it. Makes you feel good. So when we're Democrats, we've got to do a better job at messaging that gets through to people. And one of the most important things is that we set our agenda, not them. We're the ones that have to communicate what we believe. We cannot let them define us. And not everything they say requires an answer. Republicans love to do this thing where they come up with wild and outrageous things. They say it, and then we feel like we have to respond, right? If I was running for office and the Republicans put out a thing saying, one time in Arizona, Trevor Southerland said this, well, I feel like I have to say I've never been to Arizona. It couldn't have possibly been me. You don't always need to respond to every little thing they say. And importantly, if Democrats don't have a jobs message, we don't have a message. We have to define all of the things we believe as Democrats. But when we're talking to the voters, we have to have a clear, a straight jobs message. We are working for better jobs. We are working for higher pay. We are working for reliable jobs. Whatever it is, it changes a little. But we have to have a jobs message, or else so much of our other messaging just falls apart and doesn't matter. We also have to remember that we have 203 districts. That means we're going to have 203 messages. You cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach to a legislative campaign because so much changes from one county to another, from one region of the state to another. So much changes that it's got to be different, and it's got to fit our candidates, right? If you're a candidate who's, let's just say, for example, a former Marine, you can talk about that service and you can talk about that life in a way that I can't. I mean, I was in marching band, but that wasn't the Marines. So you've got to have your message that fits you as a candidate. And you've got to make sure that you get that across to people and that you're doing a message that is honest to you, because people can tell when you're not doing a message that's yours. And the most important thing of any political campaign ever is dollars and doors. Raising early funds helps secure later funds. Again, I know a lot of you know this, Emily's List. There's nobody named Emily. Early money is like yeast. It raises dough. That's what Emily stands for in Emily's List. Getting early funds helps our candidates and helps the HDCC prove viability. The representative was talking about the DLCC, and obviously having Dina there is wonderful for us. But the DLCC, when they are looking at different chambers, when they are looking at the possibilities for flips in 2022, they are going to look at our early funds. They're going to look at how many donors we have. They're going to look at what we're doing, because they want to know, does Pennsylvania believe we can flip the House? Because if Pennsylvanians don't believe it, the DLCC isn't going to bring in national money. Same thing for our candidates. Our candidates who are, talking to Emily's List and all these other groups and trying to get them to help them out, those groups are going to look and see what they've done early, who they've raised from, how much they've raised, how consistent it's been, because they want to see that viability in fundraising. And the doors. We're getting back on the doors. We can do so safely. Hopefully, people who are on the doors have been vaccinated. We certainly encourage that. I do personally. You can wear a mask. You can wear gloves if you want to. You can use hand sanitizer. There are ways that we have to safely canvass to get back on the doors, and it's crucial that we do so, because as the representative was talking about earlier, that is our strength, and not having that in 2020 really hurt. So we've got to get that back. That's going to be a huge part of what we're doing. I am very excited about our possibilities and what we have ahead of us in Pennsylvania. I don't know if anybody can see the packing peanuts back here behind me. I'm currently in Virginia this morning. My house is very much almost empty. I'm sitting on my dog's food container, so he is very thrown off about what's happening. He does not know why I'm sitting on his food container, but it's because we only have one couch left in the house, so I have nowhere to sit except for the living room. So I am excited. I think we have great possibilities, and I really appreciate you guys having me on. And I see the chat is lighting up, so I don't know if there's some questions in there, but I'd be willing to do my best to try to answer some.
Yes, we definitely have some questions for you.
Yep, so we're happy to take questions.
All right.
And I just want to say again, I see Claudette, I see Jill, I see Deb, and I see Amanda. Thank you for running last year. We're hoping that some of you will run again. I know that Deb's already made that commitment. I had to run twice to get to the legislature. Represent supported me in 2014 in a race I didn't win, and then helped me in 2015. And I am hopeful that we can have some more victories. In 2018, we looked at the seats that Hillary Clinton had won in 2016 that were held by Republicans, and those were the seats that you helped us flip. Right now, there are 12 seats held by Republicans that Biden won last year, and those are the seats that we're putting our first energy into. So Trevor and I are both happy to take questions.
All right, we had a question from Julie about preliminary census reports showing that Southeast Pennsylvania is gaining population and the rest of the state, except for Allegheny and State College, losing it. How can this swing be helpful in redistricting and winning the House?
Yep. So redistricting, you all know this. I mean, a lot of folks are much more knowledgeable about gerrymandering than we used to be, but these seats were drawn for Republicans, and in the face of a turnout surge for Trump, they reverted to the original maps. We are expecting there to be new legislative districts. There will still only be 203, but there are potential for districts to be added in Philadelphia and potentially in the suburban counties because of population growth. Now, there's going to be a fight over redistricting, but the fact that the Supreme Court acted so quickly to nominate the fifth tie-breaking vote, who's the former Chancellor of Pitt, is a good sign. He is a Democrat and someone who we believe will be fair. And we have always said that we just need fair maps. The Republicans have had the pen for 30 years. We should be able to compete in fair maps. But because the Trump administration messed up the census so badly, we're not going to have final data from the federal government until the end of September, which means we are probably not going to have final maps until February. So that means, again, all the early work that we're doing with this deep canvassing, with candidate recruitment, we're going to have to be very, very nimble, because it could be February and we could have 2 new state house districts, or even 3, that are suddenly winnable. And we're going to have to stand up campaigns very, very quickly, which is why all of the work that needs to be done in 2021 is so important. But we are hopeful that we could be gaining new maps and new seats that would be much more favorable for Democrats.
Helen, I have a question. And that's that what we'd like to see this time is a unified messaging. And Trevor talked about messaging, and I know Leanne has talked about messaging, but we hear different things from the PA Dems versus the Senate campaigns versus the House campaigns. And there seemed to be little coordination in the last cycle with, for example, the Biden campaign. How can we do a better job of not only coordinating on the ground level, but also making sure that we have consistent messages like the ones that Trevor talked about? So, because so many of our candidates felt like they were, always on defense, guarding against being called a socialist, or that they wanted to defund police. How can we make sure that all the Democratic voices in the state are talking a master message that then gets refined for individual districts?
Trevor, can you talk about how you're approaching coordination and messaging for next year?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Every, coordinated campaign is different. And the presidential years are even harder because the presidential campaigns definitely have a different approach to things. We have already started working with the PDP, working with the Senate, and having some early conversations with people who may or may not be our statewide candidates. Obviously, we're waiting to see how all of that plays out. But we've already started having those conversations with the PDP and the Senate about how we need to make sure we work together. Messaging can be difficult because, like I said, each candidate has to speak to their own truth. Each candidate has to speak to their own lived experiences. So sometimes our messaging can be a little shifting based on who those candidates are. But the goal is having an overarching message that is consistent with what we stand for as Democrats. And we're already talking about how we can make sure we do that, how we can keep that straight. So I think we'll be able to do a good job of that in 22. But I also think, it really is, it's that early communication that it's very difficult to have in a presidential year, especially one where you have, quite frankly, such a contested primary as we had in 2020. It wasn't like everybody just knew Biden was going to be the nominee, so everybody started working early with the Biden camp. There was a contested primary, and when the Biden camp came in, very much they take over. So not having the presidential will give us more leeway on that, and it gives us that ability to start talking now, which I think is extremely helpful.
Joanne, I think you had a question.
Yeah. So following up on Christine, it's not just about the substance of the message, whether it's jobs or exactly what the issue is. It's also the way we talk to people. And there's a lot of work that's been done on the class race narrative that Raphael Warnock is a perfect example of. When candidates are confronted by a lot of negative attacks that are focused on the wedge issues of social issues. I think many of them were stymied about how to respond. And the race class narrative has done actually controlled experiments to identify how you can diffuse those kind of conversations. And I don't know how many of you, I'm sure many of you saw Raphael Warnock's ad where he walks down the street past picket fences with his dog. And he says, well, I don't know, it must be that Kelly Loeffler doesn't have anything to say about herself, because she spends all of her time, attacking me. And then he sort of has this conversation about, who he is. And then he has a poop bag for his dog. And he said, it's all a bunch of trash, and throws it in the garbage. And that is a quintessential response to these kind of attacks where the words that you use and the way you frame the message is so important. And I would, and Trevor knows about this, I'm sure, because I think that in Virginia, there was certainly knowledge of this work that's been done and the use of it. So, and when we know that in the down ballot races for legislative races, not a single candidate used the race class narrative. And that, I think, is political malpractice. So I hope we can talk about that as well. And Trevor can focus on the way we can give people ideas about not just the positive message we're trying to put out, but how we respond to all the garbage that's coming at us.
So, Joanne, I've got to ask you this because I love this. Those Raphael Warnock ads were beautiful. Do you know the big secret of them, though?
The big secret? No, I'm not sure I know what you mean.
It's not his beagle.
Oh, I know it's not his beagle. I know he doesn't have a dog. And that wasn't his neighborhood either, but it doesn't matter. The whole frame worked so beautifully.
You're exactly right. And that's something that, quite frankly, it's a lot harder sometimes to run state legislative races. Everybody thinks it's easier, the lower you go on the ballot. It's not, it's harder. And the reason is a lot of times because when we're talking about state house districts in Pennsylvania, you're talking about 60,000 people. That sounds like a lot, but it's not. That's like, imagine, if a Penn State football game was half full, that's 60,000 people. That's not a lot of people. There are 2 districts in that stadium on game day. So when you're thinking about that, and when you're a candidate, when you have attacks coming at you and when you have Republicans hitting you with that, it's tough because it's your friends and family that are seeing that. And so for a lot of candidates, they feel like they have to respond to everything and they have to respond to it directly. And you're exactly right. You don't have to do that. There's a way we can message it. And that's something that I think we're going to spend a lot of time working with candidates on because we simply just have to do a better job. And it's nothing against the candidates because I get why they feel like that. And nobody nobody feels the pressure of an attack at like a candidate. But we're gonna work on it. I think there's a lot we can do, and I think you'll be happy with it. I just hope Deb's happy with it. If Deb's happy with it, I'll be okay.
Trevor, we've gotten a bunch of questions about support in rural Pennsylvania, how we can help recruit candidates, what are the Dems going to do for our rural districts?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I would love, and I mentioned this in the chat, so I leave this open to anybody. I would love to get together a group with rural Dems to talk about what we can do in rural areas. It is a couple of things. First off, we have to look at the districts one by one to see what our opportunities are. I understand that some districts are flippable, but they need a lot of work. And for the HDCC and for other groups, it's a margin of how do we get to the majority. And so we have to start by looking at the most flippable districts and how we can get there. There are some districts that are lower down on the list that with the right candidate, with the right campaign, with the right everything else, they could become flippable. But that doesn't mean that, you know, a district that we don't win isn't worthy of being respected. When we do our candidate and staff training, all of our candidates will be invited to that. All hopefully 203 districts will be included, because that's where it really starts. It starts with being able to train a candidate and to help them understand the real inner workings, not just of a campaign, but of messaging and of communication. And I know that sounds crazy because we've been communicating our whole lives, but it really is something different when you're a candidate. There really is a different way you have to do it. And it's important that our candidates, especially in rural areas, understand that, because there is a way we can talk to rural folks and get through to them. We also have to acknowledge sometimes that there's some people that they aren't going to be with us. And we can't win everybody's vote, and that's okay. You know, I always tell people when you're canvassing and when you're doing that 1 to 5 band score, you know, are you really going to vote for Leanne or you're not going to vote for Leanne? The best thing anybody can do is say, I'm going to vote for Leanne. I'll be there, rain or shine, hell or high water, I'm voting for Leanne. The second best thing they can do is tell you, I'm never going to vote for Leanne. Because then you know, great, I'm going to go talk to your neighbor because I'm wasting time here. The people in the middle, I love them. We can talk to them a lot more, but those are the two best things. And that can be hard, as a lot of times for rural candidates. I am from a rural area. I have Republican, I have Trump voting family, and it is tough because I really want to save my aunt. It really disturbs me how much she has bought into this Trump narrative, but I just can't save her. And so I got to learn to let Aunt Susan go. And I got to focus on Aunt Tracy and Aunt Sunny because they're at least reasonable. And that can be hard for folks. So we're going to talk about that a lot. But I really would love to get a group together to talk about rural PA, to talk about the different parts of rural PA. This was something that always bothered me in Virginia. I apologize if you've never seen a map of Virginia. When people talk about rural Virginia, most of the time they're talking about southwestern Virginia. But Virginia has Shenandoah, which comes up. It's right next to PA almost. Virginia has the Eastern Shore, which a lot of times people leave off the maps. People think it's part of Maryland or Delaware. It's not. It's part of Virginia. And there are all different parts of rural Virginia, and there's all different parts of rural Pennsylvania. And so we have to talk about it not just in a rural sense, but in a rural, local to you sense. What is your version of rural? So I hope we can get a group together to do that because it's very important that we do so. And it's very important that we make sure that our candidates in rural PA have a support network. I'm not going to promise them all the money in the world because I can't. And that's number one thing. I'm never going to, you will never hear me promise a candidate money because I don't know. And I can't promise you that. What I can promise you is I will answer your email. I will answer your text messages. I will sometimes answer your phone calls, but emails and text are better. And I will be there to offer support. The HDCC will be there to offer support because we appreciate it when somebody steps up to run, and they at least deserve that amount of respect. And we'll be very happy to give it to them.
Trevor, there are about 1 million more questions in the chat. I have to say, I personally have found this incredibly exciting. I would love to know more about what you personally, besides winning campaigns, like what is it that you find most exciting about doing this work? What's the thing that you feel like is your secret that you leverage?
So here's the thing, and I tell people this: there's no secret to it. This is really hard work, and you know, when I show people that picture of my family on one side and the newspaper headline on the other, like that really is. That is my life, 24 hours. If I'm not doing something with my family, I'm working. If I'm not working, I'm with my family. I love football. I love basketball. I love baseball. I don't think I've been to a live sporting event in about 5 years, maybe even longer. Sometimes I get to watch one on TV. So it is the work. It is about getting in it. But the best thing about it is look at what the Virginia General Assembly has done in the last 18 months. For the first time in 26 years, Virginia has a Democratic trifecta. And in 18 months, first thing they did was expanded voting. They made it easier to vote. They went on a tear of LGBT rights bills. They took, Virginia became the 3rd state in the country to pass a law to make hiring discrimination based on somebody's hairstyle illegal. And I don't know how many of you understand how big of a problem that is. I didn't understand it until I was told it wasn't illegal. Like, how can you not hire somebody based on their hairstyle? But that's a thing. There are so many things that they've gotten done in 18 months. And that is what we really have to look towards. We have to look towards what we can do in Pennsylvania if we can take control of state government and be able to pass good legislation that helps everyday people. There was a bill that passed in Virginia with one person voted against it. It passed the Senate 40-0. It passed the House 99-1. And it was a bill that helped extend healthcare coverage for children with autism whose parents worked at a small business, right? That sounds simple, and it passed overwhelmingly. It never got through committee when Republicans were in charge. Once Democrats were in charge and it sailed through, all the Republicans except one jerk voted for it. And that's the types of things that, like, you don't even understand so many simple things that just change overnight as soon as we take that majority. And that's what keeps me going, because of how many good things we got done in Virginia and how many good things we can get done in Pennsylvania.
I think we have time for just one more question, Helen. Do you have a good one?
Well, so Trevor, you answered this in the chat, but you talked about jobs, and someone asked a question about the minimum wage. Is that going to be a focus for you in 2022?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be so many different focuses, but jobs is the big one. The minimum wage is definitely an important one. There's a lot that goes into that, but every state that borders Pennsylvania has a higher minimum wage. West Virginia has a higher minimum wage. Ohio has a higher minimum wage. That's insane. You know, everybody focuses, they want to talk about New York and New Jersey. Talk about West Virginia and Ohio. Why don't we even match the minimum wage in West Virginia? I don't know how many more times I have to say West Virginia in a weird way to get it across, but it's West Virginia, y'all. I don't know if you've driven down there. You should sometime. It's a beautiful place. But it's West Virginia. So yeah, we're going to talk about that minimum wage.
Okay, and Trevor's also put his email in the chat about 36 times. So if you had a question that did not get asked here today, I'm pretty sure he's inviting you to reach out directly.
We will be, as you know, this is a recording. We will be polishing it up and sending it out to people. It will be available both on our YouTube channel and our website. Share it with everybody you know. This has been an incredibly valuable discussion. And Leanne, as you listen to all of this, and I know you're working hard to be in the majority and for leadership, tell us what a difference it would make to be in a Democratic majority.
Thanks, Chris. Folks, you helped send me to Harrisburg almost 6 years ago. And I have been fighting bad things since I got there, but we have so many wonderful bills that Democrats have drafted that have gone to committee to die. Instead of fighting unconstitutional abortion bans next week, I'd love to be running the bill that I drafted to help expand and protect access to birth control in Pennsylvania, because that's fundamental health care that we need. As Trevor said, we can't emphasize enough that the minimum wage debate is one that the Republicans won't even bring those bills to the floor. And instead of running voter suppression bills, which I promise you are coming very soon here in Pennsylvania, we would love to expand access to voting. There were so many good things that could have been done in the voting law that was changed before the 2020 elections, and they didn't get in there. Rural and Republican and Democratic counties are all begging us to expand pre-canvassing so they can start counting mail-in votes earlier, so we don't have to wait days for results, and yet the Republicans have no interest in putting that on the agenda. So there are so many good things that we could do if you helped us get the gavel. We too could have a female Speaker of the House here in Pennsylvania. Eileen Filler-Corn is Speaker in Virginia. Joanna McClinton is our Democratic minority leader now, and I'd love to see her with a gavel in her hand. We would make history in Pennsylvania if you could help us do that. So I've been fighting hard, and I'm not leaving. My work's not done. Chairing HDCC is the biggest unpaid job I've ever taken on, but I want to be able to do good things in our state capital, folks, and I know that you do too. So thank you again for all of the support that you've given us in the past. And thank you again to the candidates on the call who have run hard and are considering about running again. And thank you in advance for all the work that you'll do in the future. A couple folks have texted me asking about this deep canvassing program. Trevor's pitching some options to our leadership team actually next week. So Chris, if it's okay, we'd love to circle back with you when we have some more details. It's not cheap to have this level of canvassing, but it's something that we absolutely think we need. And so we're happy to have a conversation with a smaller group of people who want to know what that looks like once our leadership team has given the sign off.
That's great. One of the things we've tried to do in these breakfast briefings and in our meetings with people is not only educate them on what issues would be different, how we, the kinds of things that a Democratic leadership would have us working on in the state, like minimum wage, like environmental laws, like choice, but also help to educate voters, help to educate people on what is DPI, what is deep canvassing, what is the race class narrative. And so those are going to be some of the future events that we have on breakfast briefings, is because we're trying to raise educated voters, not only to help them understand why it matters who's representing you in Harrisburg, but what are all these other things that you should know about? Because you are all in meetings that we're not in. You're all in meetings that Trevor and Leanne are not in. I hope you're sitting there going, you know what I just learned the other day? I had no idea the effect of ba-da-da-da. And I hope that you're all educated voters and talking to your friends and relatives and being really obnoxious about all of this, because it is so important. And it's much better than Trevor's aunt, whoever it is, who he's just given up on, but also, the ones that you haven't given up on, and just say, you know what I just learned? And you can be deep canvassing your friends and relatives. And so that'll be a future discussion we have as to how to do things like this so that you all can be educated voters and donors and activists. And so thank you, Trevor and Leanne. I had talked to both of you before this, and you've clearly exceeded my my hopes and dreams for this discussion, and we'll have you on again. And we're here anytime you have a new message you want to present. We'd be happy to pull together a group. We're thrilled that we had over 100 people on this call. We've talked about redistricting. Leanne mentioned that the 5-person committee has started. Joanna McClinton, for example, is really big on this whole issue of prison gerrymandering. Do you know what this is? This means that people who are in a prison in Pennsylvania, which is probably in a rural area, get counted as part of that district and not as part of their home district. So many of them will be long out of prison and back in their home district someplace, and yet they're not counted as a citizen of their home district. They're counted on in these other. That's also gone into a lot of the gerrymandering issues we've had. So Joanna, as part of this 5-member committee, is really bringing a lot of amazing issues up, and we look forward to seeing what happens out of this committee. Next slide. And I know a lot of our past candidates are looking forward to seeing what happens to their districts too. We're working on some future briefings that I mentioned. Check out our website, Give to Represent. We want early money. We've got the money came in later last cycle. We want it earlier. We want to be able to go after and support a lot of, Leanne and I've had a discussion about which of our incumbents might be at risk. 3.5 years ago, we helped elect some amazing women to the Senate, for example. And this is Maria Colletts and Katie Muth and Lindsey Williams, first time up for re-election. These women will need our support early because they are national targets. And we need to support Senate candidates as well as the House candidates were discussed. Open to discussions. I also mentioned that our operations manager role, it's a half-time job. We're looking for a fabulous person who wants to help change Pennsylvania with us. Let us know if you've got somebody who wants to work 20 hours a week with some great women. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being on the call today. I hope you're all enthusiastic and ready to go out and do battle. Thank you.